are you going to achieve it? Listening to what you just heard Shuganda say, how are you going to achieve it by 2030?
Right, so look, this is the start. Great British Energy is about creating competition into the grid. This is about cheap, homegrown renewables. At the moment, you cannot get a space on the grid for 15 years. The government have got a backlog of new technologies, of different ways. You know, we've already lifted the ban on onshore wind. That's the very first thing that we have done. So this is something we don't have a choice. We have to do it if we want to bring bills down. We want to have energy security, and we will create good jobs by doing this.
Yes, and this is all the campaign stuff that we heard. But just to be clear to our viewers, Preet, it is going to involve something like 1,000 miles of power lines and of undersea cables. The National Grid's electricity systems operator said it would be at a cost of £60 billion to upgrade to electricity being totally renewable by 2030. How's that going to happen?
Look, first thing is that you've got to have planning proposals put in place, and so there will be the normal consultation. This is not going to be something we force on anybody, especially farmers, for example. This will have to be done with consent. And as you say, there is underground cabling. We've got to look at the cost factor of that as a, you know, and pylons. But this essentially is about how do we get the electricity to businesses and into homes. This is a big challenge. We've had Conservatives that have done nothing. We've been reliant on foreign dictators for our energy security, and we need to make a shift and transition to that.
Henry?
I mean, the reason the Conservatives have done nothing is because they have refused time and again to force people to build stuff they don't want to do, which is exactly what you're saying you'll do now. Ultimately, the problem with our planning system is that it is riddled with local vetoes, and local people often have very different cost-benefit analyses to the country. The test for essential infrastructure, of which pylons is part, should not be whether local people want it, it should be whether the nation needs it, and central government should have the will to drive it through. And if you're not prepared to do that, you're not going to deliver anything like the amount of cabling required.
We will deliver that, but of course we've got to explain to the British...
I can't believe I'm agreeing with Henry Hill. He's absolutely right. The material interests of very individual communities are not in any way linked to the material interests of the country at large, which is a big problem when you actually want to get around the NIMBY problems. True, NIMBYs are unpatriotic. That's true. They hate Britain. If you're a NIMBY, you hate Britain, 100%. Copy China on renewables. Well, I mean, there's a reason why China have built, you know, thousands of miles of high-speed rail and huge installations of renewable energy. And that's because if you don't like what the state does, you can't locally object to the Communist Party of China. I'm fully Jinping-pilled on this. Fully Jinping-pilled. You've had your fun with a local authority planning consent. You've proven that you can't be trusted. You've proven that you can't be trusted with local planning consent because nothing's been built and now the country sucks, right? You've proved we tried to let you have fun with it. Like we're gonna take away the toys now. We're taking away your toys, children, because you've proven that you can't share. You've proven that you don't have everyone else's interests at heart. You've proven you're selfish. You've proven that you do not give a shit about the broader interests of society and the country at large. Something literally that is part of neoliberalism, this kind of individualism over collectivism, the individual good over the public good. That has been like a fermented part of neoliberalism. Just using the state to be able to ferment that by having these local authority planning consent stuff. And I'm like, no. You've had your fun with it. We're taking it away. We're taking it away. We're putting it back in the toy box, right? And you don't get it back until you can prove that you can be trusted. And in the meantime, we're building a fuck ton of pylons.
Public why we need to do it. Unfortunately, previously, people haven't just really understood how the grid works, why our electricity and gas is so expensive. Look, absolutely. You're talking about need. We have got to do this. We do not have a choice in the matter, especially when we think about climate. The Greens have, the co-leader of the Greens has been objecting to a lot of these renewable projects when nobody knows actually what the Greens actually support, to be honest. But yes, we will. There is a clear plan and strategy that Ed Miliband has together about how we achieve this.
Right. Well, Carla, you say that isn't quite true. It is true. So one of the people that Henry is talking about when he says that local people have a different view, one of those local people is your new Green MP, Adrian Ramsey. He's called for a pause in terms of building power lines that would go through his constituency. Now, you're the Green Party.
I think the thing as well is that when you build these things, you'll get loads of opposition to the planning when you try and put it through from local communities or whatever. If you force it through, they'll learn to deal with it. They'll get mad about the pylons for like 5 days, and the pylons will be constructed and they'll forget they're fucking there, and they'll get busy caring about something far more important. Just do it and they'll stop complaining. It's just like when Harold Wilson decriminalised homosexuality, like massively against public consensus. There was no public consensus for the decriminalisation of homosexuality whatsoever in this country. They made it legal. Did it cost him the next election? No. People didn't fucking care. They got on with their lives and allowed the gays to start fucking each other.
There was ever not in my backyard. That's it.
It is absolutely in the DNA of the Greens to push for a more rapid rollout of renewables. That is literally...
Including pylons and power lines across his constituency.
My co-leader, Adrian, newly elected, hard-working MP, has rightly been making sure that the people in his constituency have a chance to have their voice heard in the ongoing public consultation.
So has he failed to communicate the message possibly at a Green MP?
Right. But both he and I have previously worked in the renewable energy sector. In my case, I've literally gone into politics because I used to work in offshore wind, and I saw that the barrier to the rapid rollout isn't the technology, as we've just heard from the expert there, it's the political will. And on the grid specifically, if I may, I would argue that part of the reason that the grid hasn't been invested in and built out earlier, because really the time this needed to happen was decades ago, not now, is in part because the national grid is privatised, and so they didn't have that public mandate to invest in the system decades ahead before... Because we've now got renewable energy projects that are having to
you're going to object to it now, even though a pylon in this constituency, in Adrian Ramsey, constituency...
What's interesting as well is that Joe Coburn said, well, clearly Adrian Ramsey hasn't managed to get his message across correctly. People keep quoting from the Telegraph article that doesn't really quote him in full. Like, again, I disagree with Adrian Ramsey's position on this. I vehemently disagree with his position on this, absolutely. He literally said, when he was asked to quote for this, it's absolutely critical that we do build this infrastructure. He even said this, he admitted the infrastructure needed to get built, which is more than you get from other NIMBY types, but even so, he's still wrong. He's still wrong to oppose this. But, you know, Carla is also right. It'd be much easier to be able to connect people to the grid if it was in any way publicly owned and had actual public interest at heart, had public utility at heart, rather than, you know, private profit being more important than public utility.
In particular, is going to carry that electricity from the offshore wind to parts of the country that's needed.
I have to pick up on what you said there. Adrian Ramsey is not opposing all pylons and the Green Party.
I didn't say all. I said the one in his constituency.
There's so much more in Britain where pylons can go.
So, to clarify, my colleague Adrian is challenging particular aspects of the route
his constituency.
And suggesting that, may I just finish, that parts of the route should be undergrounded in ecologically sensitive areas.
How much is that going to cost?
Which the National Grid has already done in some areas in response to first rounds of the feedback, and he's helping constituents to have their voices heard on the impacts on the local area, which I think is what every...
5 times as much.
I've read 10 times,
and
but look, well, you know...
for certain parts of the route, even if it's not the whole thing, I think is worth considering.
Right, OK, well, maybe it is worth considering. Luke, you support, I presume, the plans by the Labour government, the ambition of it and their commitment to saying no.
I've got an insight into this, having spent the PPS in BEIS and then in energy and net zero. So I've heard these debates go on, and it's very interesting. I think both Labour and the Greens are going to get a rude awakening when they are put there, but as MPs, to say, would you have solar panels in, you know, Edgbaston Golf Club, for example, where I trained. It's very hard then for you to turn around to your public and say, well, it's for the greater good. There has to be a balance on this, and that's why I'm quite excited to see what comes forward. We put forward the energy security bill that has now gone into place, but I'm quite keen to see what GB Energy actually looks like and what a wealth fund actually looks like, because we're still not really clear. Does it make any energy?
I mean, the Wealth Fund is very clear. They've been very clear in what the Wealth Fund does. It is an amalgamation of the British Business Bank and the National Infrastructure Bank with GB Energy slapped on top, and it's going to pay for share equity in private companies. They've been very clear on what it is. Very incredibly clear, so much so that it's incredible that our journalists just haven't bothered picking up on it. All of the campaign material's been there, all of the things, part of their manifesto's there. They've even done a whole fucking press release on government websites about exactly what it's going to do. And all the journalists up to the election never questioned it until the very last minute. And even now, they've gone back to referring to it as being an energy company. We have known for over a year that it's just an investment fund for share equity. That's all it's been. That's all it's ever been. We've known this. Why can't our journalists and MPs on opposite benches understand what it is? It is, however, not going to be an energy company, so this is why guys write about one thing.
what's the risk profile on this wealth fund that's going to be there?
Who's going to carry the can? You ought to read the briefings, in all honesty. But this idea that somehow in Birmingham Edgbaston they wouldn't expect a solar panel, say, on a green field, that is incorrect, because most people understand that they want their bills to come down. Yeah. They want energy security, and we have to look at green spaces where you can do dual things. The argument made by the co-leader of the Greens in his local part is about what about food security, what about the rural environment, what about the traffic, what about the community? This is the difficult part, and government is to make a choice. And Henry's right here. These are really, really difficult issues to try and work out.
And ones that Conservatives failed to actually grapple with because of vested interest.
Hang on, you did hear from Shiganda saying that actually we've managed to make a significant change over the last 8 years. We are the fastest decarbonising side, but country in the world. But the infrastructure side is fundamental, and we've just.
Will there be a way of central government paying local authorities if they have some positive outcomes with ecological projects? So there is a part of the GB Energy Plan is to spend their money on what's called the local power plan, which is paying for investment in new green energy projects in local authorities that want them, that can then use the revenue from that private projects selling money to the grid with the share that GB Energy gets from its investment being used to bring down council tax bills. So it's basically a way of saying, if you have this green energy project in your constituency, we'll give you lower council tax bills. Now, I don't know why they don't do that for the whole fucking thing. I don't know why they don't have that for literally every single project that they're doing for the whole of GB Energy's investment fund. But it's only like a tiny part of it. That's Ed Miliband's hands all over that one, by the way. Like, Ed Miliband can be credited for the local power plan. That's his baby. But that massively got stripped back in terms of funding and scope when they did this whole £28 billion U-turn. We see what the French are doing, solar panels on car parks. Well, we should have solar panels fucking everywhere. You can get solar glass nowadays. You can literally get solar glass. You can have, all those office blocks that we have now with like the full kind of sheet panes of glass on the side. Those could all be solar glass. We can have our entire kind of office community that uses heaps of electricity, unnecessarily, might I add. They could all generate their own energy by investing in solar glass. They could have all done that. I know that these big fucking multinational corporations have got the money to spend on it. And solar is the form of energy that is getting the cheapest and most efficient in terms of renewables.
Just been talking about defence and wanting to spend more there, but trying to argue 10 years ago
you had no idea how to do this. The National Wealth Fund that we are talking about is £1 of investment. We will want £3
So what's the risk profile for it? Are we seeing
There's been no stability for businesses to bring in investment.
Talk to each other, don't talk over each other if you can.
I'm really keen to see. So it's not a wealth fund in the sense of what Norway have set out, but what's the risk profile to the taxpayer? How much do they expect to get up? Because from what I gather, it's supposed to be an investment on the riskier part. So how much of a hit? And you've put it out to a quango.
When it was the British Business Bank that was that's being replaced by the National Wealth Fund, mate. When the Conservatives set up the British Business Bank, a Jeremy Corbyn policy, might I add, the idea of having a state investment bank was a Jeremy Corbyn policy, although it wasn't supposed to be loans and subsidies, it was supposed to be an actual investment with a government stake in. When the Conservatives set up the British Business Bank, it was just loans and subsidies. They're not getting returns for the taxpayer on subsidies. £500 million to Tata Steel to then close up a bunch of jobs at Port Talbot anyway was money that was spent in subsidy by the government. Where the risk profile is 100%, because it doesn't matter whether the private sector succeeds or fails when you give out subsidy. They've got the money already. They can fucking run. They can do an Atari Teenage Riot with their record label's First Advance. There's no need for them to ever have success or failure because they've been given government money for free with no fucking conditions on doing so. The whole point of share equity is that there are conditions available. There is at least some amount of government stake in the running of the company. Not enough. I've consistently argued that the government stake should be much higher, if not 100%, and create a state-owned company to do this construction. But whatever. If you're going to do public-private partnership, at least have the government with 50% so that they have some kind of controlling stake over how that company is operated. At the very least, then, you have a sense in where you can minimise risk by ensuring the government can control that risk. And when it does succeed, you do get equity back. You don't get any equity back from subsidy at all.
The minister himself.
Come on. Well, there are lots of questions, but the broad question, if you don't mind me summarising, is bills will have to go up, won't they, in the short term, to pay for this, and then bills might come down in 10 years' time.
What's why would the bills go up to pay for it? It's coming from fiscal expansion. The private sector, it's overseas investors investing in the private sector and the state creating new... Why the fuck would bills go up, Joe? Why the fuck would bills go up? What the fuck are you talking about, Joe? Bills are going up because we've not invested. It's the lack of investment that's put up the fucking bills because the supply-demand curve has shifted up. Demand has increased, but supply hasn't. Therefore, prices go up. If we increase the supply of energy, if we increase the overall supply of energy in the economy, that will shift the supply-demand curve down and bring prices down. Are you insane? What the hell are you talking about?
No, I don't.
You don't think bills will have to go up at all?
No. The National Wealth Fund is about, we will invest £1 and we will ask £3 investment from private sector. Why is that important? The private sector hasn't had the stability it needs from this government, from the last government, in order to bring about the investment. So how do we get our ports renewable ready? How do we invest in hydrogen? How do we have the gigafactories that Labour has already made commitments to? How do we invest in the steel industry? These are all really important investment projects, decarbonising those industrial hubs. Well, this is exactly what's needed. I mean, none of this
it may be
existed.
what's needed, but it is about whether or not you will be able to drive through opposition, the sort of opposition that we've been talking about. I mean, just broadly,
Carl, given that Labour have rolled back on their investment pledge. I mean, let's not forget, this is the party who rolled back on their 28 billion climate investment pledge.
But you'd still be opposing some infrastructure.
Your co-leader is objecting to pylons in his constituency. I mean...
See what I mean? How fucking myopic this debate is? Like, whatever your criticism of Adrian Ramsey's opposition to those pylons in his constituency, very reasonable concerns to have with Adrian Ramsey's position. I absolutely disagree with him. You should build the goddamn pylons. Absolutely build the goddamn fucking pylons, right? Super easy to do. I always have criticisms of Ramsey's position here, but the idea that that's somehow the real bugbear here, the real evil here, the real problem is one person somewhere blocking some pylons, rather than the amount of investment that we need broadly to create the new supply of energy to actually bring prices down. Like, this is fucking chicken feed. One set of pylons versus £28 billion of public investment you turned on. Come off it. It's a ridiculous debate, and it's all being done and broadcast everywhere to just smear the Green Party from one bad thing that they've done. And it is bad. It absolutely is bad. But this is not the entirety of the Green Party's platform opposing one set of pylons. It's literally they're creating a pylon. Exactly. The pylon whenever Carla says something substantive. It's that bit in The Simpsons, right? Where Marge Simpson gets addicted to slot machines in Mr. Burns' casino, and Homer Simpson at the end kind of regales all of these things that he did wrong and then goes, well, that doesn't matter anymore because you have a gambling problem. And it's just the same thing with the Greens. It's like, doesn't matter all of these legitimate concerns you have over the level of our investment target, over what we're doing on housing, over what our position is on Palestine, over things we do on regards to social policy and workers' rights. Doesn't matter about those things because you oppose the pylons. You can't talk to us anymore because you opposed the pylons one time.
Goodness me, what we have is a very clear plan about how do we get energy security. At the moment, we're reliant on foreign dictators. The government sold off gas storage. And at the moment, we're paying 62 million a day because the grid can't actually cope with capacity. This is dire. So actually, what we are going to do will address a lot of these issues.
And I'm interested to see what happens with Great British Energy. It could be a really important part of the solution. But if you're going to massively cut investment in climate action, which is what the Labour Party did before it even got into power, how are you going to fund that? The 28 billion that was your policy was already the floor of what was needed. And we know that the sooner we invest in reducing carbon emissions, the cheaper it is for government. The later we leave it, the more it costs.
If Labour's really serious about this, it should make GB Energy a planning authority with the power to give itself planning permission. That would allow it to deliver everything it wanted and take all of the politicians and their local concerns out of the equation. I don't think it is clear because you started the spiel for Great British Energy saying it wasn't something you were going to force on people, and then within 2 minutes were saying that you were. And it's important that you do. We really do need to force infrastructure through. I think the easiest thing for...
Infrastructure Stalinism, let's fucking go. Absolutely. Marshal Tito has declared that you will have the pylons. Absolutely. Again, they've had their fun with the local authority planning consent, and they've proven they can't be trusted. As simple as that. Like the French literally do it. They already have these like projects of national importance that go through planning objections, and I think that's right. It should be done by the state rather than private companies who will inevitably cut corners, who will inevitably do things that lead to ecological damage, right? You can't trust private companies to do the right thing. Whereas if you actually have governments engaging with the public without having the ability for it to get blocked completely by local planning consent, then we can actually have something that resembles positive utility.
Politicians to do normally is to try and build stuff in the bits of the country that vote for other people. It's absolutely extraordinary that the Conservatives didn't manage to build Abingdon Reservoir. Large parts of the southwest have avoidable drought. But the problem is always planning. The private sector has been trying to build Abingdon. It has been trying to build a lot of projects. You can't bring forward that investment unless you offer them security of planning. And you cannot offer security of planning if you have an extended process with a local veto where a single project can fall at any point of an expensive multi-year pitch process.
Right, but
so
Henry,
unless you offer those guarantees, it won't happen.
But Henry, do you think Dr. Shuganda is right that because of the experience of spiking energy prices and therefore people's bills, that might soften up some opposition to having the sorts of infrastructure that we've been talking about?
I mean, it might, and that would be wonderful, but just historically it hasn't. We've tried, energy development projects, pylons have tried offering local people lower bills as part of an incentive process for approval, and it has never worked. Sadly, the fact is, if you can get people to agree to it, it's ideal. And there are things you can do. You could try and make the pylons prettier, they're hideous. You could try and make them part of the...
Are they actually that hideous? Like, I never noticed pylons. Maybe it's just me being a little city dweller who never actually spends much time in the country because that shit's boring. Maybe it's just me, but when I drive down like the M40 or down up the M6 towards Cumbria or whatever, I don't ever notice that pylons are for it. I don't think they're that ugly. I think what would actually probably, I agree with this idea. I think broadly offering, cost incentives to people who have things built in their constituency is a good thing. I think that even if you force them through, the projects, if the extra money that they would get from lower bills or from remuneration or from part ownership or whatever, that they would get remuneration from the profits of those projects, even if that doesn't allow you to get the consent, even if it's not the thing that's going to be enough to try and get these people to consent to these things being built, at the very least, if you force this through, like Xi Jinping style, if you take the Xi Jinping pill and you force these projects through without local planning consent, people will be far less likely to hate you after the fact if you give them remuneration through shared ownership, through shared equity, through reduced bills or through profit sharing incentives and things like that, right? Rather than having it as a method of approval, rather than getting it to be approved, you use it to soften the blow. Because 4 years down the line, right, after you immediately build your solar farm in a constituency, like in Rutland and Melton, Alicia Kearns is opposing a new solar farm, I think it's Mallard Pass solar farm over in her constituency. All of the constituents will get mad when it's being built. If you do it in like the first year, then it gets built, and then however many years down the line once the next election happens, if you're getting remuneration because that solar farm is owned by your local authority, and when you get your itemised bill through for your council tax, it says, oh look, Mallard Pass solar farm gave me a £20 discount on my council tax, that's going to mean far more to you when you cast your vote at the next election than whether or not you were frustrated by the planning process 3 years ago. That's going to be far more important to you if you continue receiving that dividend over and over and over again than you would be being spurned by dictatorial government planning approval on these projects. So I think that having the shared equity is important, even if you don't have it as part of the approval process, you have it as a way of softening the blow after the fact.
Landscape in more way, but ultimately you need to have the will as central government to say this, the nation needs this, and we are going to do it, even if that leaves some people.
Can I agree with you on that? Right. I mean, the final point I would make, the cross-government working will ensure that, because of course it's different departments working together to understand why this is important and why it's important in certain areas, and being able to then communicate that, and that's exactly what will happen. Keir's very clear that that's how he's going to drive a lot of the missions, is those cross-government departments.
Well, let's just pick up on something that you were asked, Carla, during the election campaign in terms of leading from the front. Here's the Times headline. Yes, I have a gas boiler, but I plan to replace it, says Greens co-leader. Carla Denyer said she was getting quotes for a heat pump.
Literally, the two things they've got focused on the Green Party in this BBC Politics Live segment is one of your guys opposed to pylon, and do you say you have a gas boiler? a hypocrite much? You're going to talk about their macroeconomic policy, their positions on foreign policy. You're going to talk about their plans for the NHS. We're going to talk about the whole puberty blocker ban that the Green Party have opposed. Are you going to talk about all the things that they've been talking with regard to cooperative ownership? You're going to talk about their plans for like minimum wage legislation or for the difference in salary between workers and owners? Are you going to talk about all of these things that they have plans for? No, we're going to talk about gas boilers and about fucking pylons. How, like, literally, you're inviting the co-leader of a party. Like, you would never get, like, Angela Rayner on Politics Live. You'd never get Oliver Dowden on Politics Live. Why is it when a smaller party leader comes on the programme, when they get very few times that they do to actually talk about their positions, it's just like, oh, well, we saw in the Times that there was this very funny story about you being a hypocrite. Isn't this more important than your whole fucking manifesto of policies that you've got that are much more important to the public on a broad scale? Fucking ridiculous. Honestly.
I had to delay the installation until after the election. Have you accepted any of the quotes that are in your inbox?
I haven't been back in Bristol a great deal over the last few days, but yes, I have now got a couple of quotes for an installation of a heat pump. Looking forward to finding some time to get that done, perhaps in the recess.
Right, we'll come back.
At the end of the day, the issue with heat pumps is affordability. The installation cost is incredibly high. It shouldn't be, it should be far less than that, but it's high currently, and that's what government subsidy is for. A lot of people are renters. Most people don't have any choice about a heat pump because that's up to their landlord. I know Carla Denyer is a renter as well. She's mentioned it before. And the fact that she's had to be essentially been in a position where she have to negotiate with a landlord to get one installed and then pay for it out of her own bloody pocket to be able to do so. Which she'll be able to do now that she's an MP and she's earning a bit more money, I guess, on my dime. But then if it was subsidised, it also would be. And we get neoliberalised, all this fucking atomisation and individualisation. We only can ever think of these things through individual choices, and not indeed systemic problems such as lack of affordability, lack of government support, lack of legislation to ensure that these are in new builds, for example. We just don't have any discussion of these things. We literally, again, we saw a Labour ex-MP quote tweet her and say, look at me, I've had a heat pump for the last 20 years. I'm like, you're an MP earning £80,000 a year on top of being like a financial director at Peugeot Cars, making money hand over fist, and you're a mortgage holder and a property owner. Of course it was easier for you to install a heat pump than a 38-year-old engineer who lives in rented accommodation and who's only been an MP for 2 weeks. It was so fucking ridiculous. This was during the election campaign as well. But no, it has to be about her choice rather than about the actual systemic problems here. Like, she's not a hypocrite at the end of the day. And just like how Adrian Ramsey has a fucking hybrid car. If you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.